This is that 68 custom Deluxe Reverb from the other day where we had the bad hum, really bad hum and buzz, and the reverb apparently was affected. I imagine because it's connected to the screen nodes, there's not much filtering. So if something's wrong in the filtering, you'll often hear it in the reverb circuit first. Now on this particular one, all four of the big electrolytics measured okay as far as capacitance. A little bit on the low side, but within their tolerance range. Their ESR, equivalent series resistance, was a little bit higher than on the MODs and FNTs I measured, but within the normal range. This 220 microfarad 100 volt that they put here on this model, more on that in a moment, actually its ESR is off the chart. It's way too high. So that's a problem, and a little bit more on that in a moment. Let's check the actual capacitance. Yes, I can do this. I don't do it very often because usually the meter is going to tell me what I've already heard. In this case, that the amp's got issues, y'all, and it's the filter caps. All right, it's measuring half a nanofarad. That's 500 picofarad. That is a little bit lower than 220 microfarad, wouldn't you say? So this thing has almost no capacitance, and its ESR is off the chart. ESR, equivalent series resistance, when that gets higher, when that increases, the cap in normal use actually generates heat. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Once the ESR climbs, it generates heat. It hastens the failure of the capacitor. Now, a lot of people have asked, why did they put this cap in the Deluxe Reverb? And my theory on that is that if you have it with a tube rectifier, you don't need that cap. This cap in series with this cap gives you a total voltage load of 600 volts versus 500 volts for this cap by itself. I think they did that in case someone were to use one of those solid state plug-in rectifiers that Weber and other people sell, in which case the unloaded B plus could exceed 500 volts in theory. So this was just a little bit of insurance to protect owners from their own bad decisions. Why is there little pieces of paper underneath the tube sockets and all these? Haven't seen that before. That's interesting. Anyway, as long as you use a tube rectifier, this should not be necessary. And as you saw, every added complication in an amp can, in fact, just give no real benefit, but can give a new way for it to fail. The other thing that could have happened is we've got one voltage leak resistor across this cap and another one across this cap. If either of these resistors failed, one cap could get the full voltage. Now this cap wouldn't mind the full voltage. It's a 500 volt cap in stock form. You give it 480 volts, it's just fine. But if something went wrong and this 100 volt cap had 480 volts across it, things would be very different. So let's measure these two resistors, though this one's about to get jumpered anyway. This one's supposed to be 100K, measures 22 meg. This resistor opened up. This one is 470 ohms. This one stayed put. So that's what happened here. They built in this extra unnecessary protection stage with this added cap in series with this cap and the added resistor across it. And because they use that little, it's nominally a half-watt resistor. It looks more like a quarter watt. They use really tiny resistors in these things. That resistor failed open. Well, it could be that the resistor failed open and that cap got the full voltage across it as opposed to being limited to just 100 volts, or a little bit less actually, in the circuit. Or that cap failed and shorted out this resistor. We'll never know now, but what I do know going forward is that little underwattage resistor is going away because it's not needed in this amp and can cause the problems that you just saw. And I'm going to replace all four of the main filter caps, and I'm not going to put a cap here. I've done it in the past. It's really not necessary unless someone wants to run solid state rectification. It's not what the sound of a Deluxe Reverb should be, in my apparently not very humble opinion. And, sometimes I have to make fun of myself. But it's just a potential point of failure, and everything we can do to get points of failure out of these amps is a good thing. All right, 4 new MODs in place, every one of which measures pretty much exactly 20, 20, 20, 40. This one's actually 42. These are 20s. All of them have good ESR. That cap is omitted. There's a jumper wire here where that resistor that failed open was. You could do it either. You could do it both. One is sufficient, and the shorter path is always the correct one to choose. So, all the old flux off the bottom, put the doghouse cover on this. Let's see how the amp sounds now. It should no longer make nasty sounds at all unless something was affected by the pretty much a short. I think it'll probably be just fine, but let's find out. And I didn't show this whole process because I've shown that in numerous Fender Deluxe and other reissue amps, as well as many vintage ones out there. So if you want to see how I do it, I've got a vintage Fenders playlist and I've got a Fender reissue playlist. So if you have one of these, what you're looking for is somewhere in the Fender reissue playlist. Let's see how this sounds now. All right, before I plug it in and get started, there are a few things I like to check on these. I like to make sure that the lamp is tight. It often is not. And while this is the best tool for the job, pretty much it's still not perfect. But that is tight. Let me check the output jacks and the foot switch jack. Pretty good. These are often really loose on reissues. This isn't too bad. Let me check the input jacks. It's really important that all the jacks and nuts on the front panel are tight. If they are loose, the only mechanical support for those components are the solder joints. And guess what fails? Someone was asking about this 18K right here. I think it was John Williamson. And just in case anyone else had a question about that and didn't see my reply, this is not the same thing as changing the tail resistor, the mids resistor from 6.8K to 24K. They put this 18K at the junction of the mids cap and the mids resistor to ground and the bass pot. So what this 18K does is mean that you can never turn the bass knob all the way to 0. And it does give a lot more lower mids due to the way it interacts with the bass pot in operation. It's not a great sound. I don't know why they did it, but they did, and there it is. I take it out most of the time, but that's not what I was asked to do on this one. On this one, I was just asked to make the noise go away. So let's hook up the speaker jack. I've got on my current limiter, I'm gonna power it on. Let me get a better angle for you guys while this warms up. All right, it's warmed up for about 2 minutes. Let's take it out of standby. Standby is not really necessary in this amp because of the tube rectifier, but that's how the owner was using it, so I wanted to make sure that wasn't replicating the issue. Anyway, let's take it out and see if the hum's gone. Some slight noise on that pot from not being used very much, I think. Just the normal excessive white noise you get with the 68 Custom. Let me turn off the current limiter, grab a guitar, hook up a reverb tank, and put it through its basic paces. If it passes all that, I'm going to triple check the bias, put it in the cab, it'll probably be done. All right, a quick note on the reverb tank I have hooked up. It's an old one from the 70s, and its springs are way too loose. They lose tension over time, and as a result, it's really sensitive. So this is not going to really be sounding its best, but that's why it's my test tank. It lets me know if a circuit is working. Let's try the normal channel first. Do I have the tank reversed? Let's check that real quick. Well, that's interesting. The tank is not reversed, but when I bring up the reverb, it gets distorted. Now, on the original ticket, it said as you raise the reverb, it gets distorted. And I had thought that was probably going to be caused by the filter cap. And it might be an issue with the reverb driver transformer. I will find out. It could be a plate resistor. But what's weird about it is it's acting like there's no tank. It's acting like it's just feeding the straight signal in. Maybe it's miswired from the factory. Let's find out. If it's the same over here, it should be. Yeah, so that reverb circuit's awful. And it's loading down something. This is not behaving right at all. I'm wondering if it's either V4, which is the reverb recovery stage and reverb mixer, or whether it might be the cathode for that those two triodes in that stage. They share a cathode bypass cap, and if that cap is bad, you can get really strange channel mixing, which is what we're experiencing here. Let me see if it's just a tube first. It's an old groove tubes labeled JJ. What do I have handy that'll work? That's a AT7. Okay, good old quality Bugera branded ECC83. Let's see if that tube fixes the problem. If not, I strongly suspect it's probably that cathode bypass cap. It's not that, so let's see if the problem goes away if I disconnect the tank entirely. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but it could be a load thing. All right, so this is interesting. It's also possible, it's less likely, but possible, if the driver tube were bad, it could be causing that load, because not only was it distorting as you turn the reverb up, but the overall sound was dark and smaller, and that is a groove tube is labeled Sovtech 12AT7. Just happen to have this Sylvania JAN 12AT7 sitting here. That was the first thing I picked up when looking for 12AX7. Let's see if there's any difference with this tube. Always go for the simplest solution when possible. So before taking everything apart and spending a lot of time doing complex stuff, swap tubes. Let me do this without burning myself if possible. What an exciting episode you've tuned into. Lyle tries to reinstall a reverb tank with his left hand. All right. Let's see if that makes any difference. All right, see? Aren't we glad we didn't do anything heroic? Just a bad AT7. So toss that, and let's make sure that the problem is fixed on the other channel. It's a bit of a non-intuitive fix. I've never had that behavior from a bad AT7, but it's if you have a problem there, it's going to affect everything downstream of it if it's drawing way too much current. I forgot I was using the lav mic. A lot of that was probably clipping. You'll get to hear this pretty in a little bit. For troubleshooting, that's a much better place. Let me take this Bugera out and make sure the original V4 is still good. So all that is good. Let's make sure the tremolo is working. It's working, but it seems pretty noisy. Let me undo the reverb because we don't have to deal with that right now, and put a plug in there. All right, here's the noise floor. I've got the channel turned up a bit, the guitar volume's off. Turn on the tremolo. Thought I was getting it ticking before when I did it, just shunted it with a screwdriver. Must have had an imperfect connection. Let's try the reverb channel, well, vibrato channel. They're both, I don't remember what they call it, vintage, custom on this, I don't remember. On other Deluxe reverbs, this is the vibrato reverb channel. Yeah, there's a little bit of a tick to it. Let me see about moving around some of the wires. All right, I removed that dumb piece of cardboard so I can access the wires down here. You may not hear the thudding through the lav mic, but I can still hear through the speaker. It's amazing how much better our ears are with signal noise ratios in real life than we are with recordings. At least it's what we get on YouTube. Worse? Better. All this lead dress is crap. Leo would have fired whoever did this, or Don Randall, or whoever oversaw QA. Sometimes you'll see me move things and wait a bit. Sometimes parasitic oscillations take a few cycles of various capacitors to show up. All right, now I'm going to say something, and this is not me trying to say, aren't I clever? Gosh, I'm smart. Aren't I just the best? I am far from the only guy who does stuff like this. I know lots of guys who are as good and better than I am. I just want to point out that this amp had a really nasty noise and distortion when you turned the reverb up, and then it had a thud in the tremolo. You just saw me fix both those things. I didn't desolder anything. I didn't remove any parts. I didn't shotgun the amp. I didn't sell them a new transformer. I found and changed a bad tube, and I moved some wires around. That's all it needed. Sometimes the knowledge is the thing, not what that knowledge makes you do. Well, I'm going to put this video up and let the owner see it. Talk to the owner. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to know that all he needed was a relatively inexpensive recap and one new 12AT7. Off camera, I'm going to set the bias, put it back in its cabinet, and then we'll test it out in its cabinet with its speaker and its reverb tank once the new 12AT7 arrives. So I think he'll be very happy. The amp's very healthy. It's just one of those things where a lot of cheap decisions come together in just the right way, such as life.